You're listening to today's inspirational message on the Proverbs with Kurt Bjorklund.
Proverbs 15, I've said, is a place where we can see unconventional wisdom, meaning wisdom that goes against what our culture tells us. Certainly this chapter has several places where it exhorts us to heed instruction again. Verse 5, a fool despises his father's instruction, but whoever heeds reproof is prudent. Verse 12, a scoffer does not like to be reproved. He will not go to the wise. And so there's a sense here in which this chapter again tells us to heed reproof. But I'm not going to focus on that because in a way I think Proverbs has hit that. We've talked about that. And that is actually conventional wisdom in our day, just to say, pay attention, listen. But here's a place where I don't see conventional wisdom. Verse 3, the eyes of the Lord are in every place, keeping watch on the evil and the good. Verse 11, Sheol and Abaddon lie open before the Lord. How much more the hearts of the children of men? And that is something that I would say is against conventional wisdom, because conventional wisdom is often God sees and therefore you have reason to be alarmed. It's concerning. I remember the old children's song when I was a little kid that said, "Oh, be careful, little eyes, what you see. Oh, be careful, little eyes, what you see. For the Father up above is looking down with love. So be careful, little eyes, what you see." And then it would go to the next verse, "Be careful, little ears, what you hear." And it would repeat it and say, "The Father up above is looking down with love. So be careful, little ears, what you hear. Be careful, little mouth, what you say." And then it would go through the ditty again. "Be careful, little hands, what you do. Be careful, little feet, where you go." And I always felt, even as a kid, like it was a little creepy, because although it says that God is looking down with love, it presents the idea of an all-knowing God in a way that is merely a deterrent to bad behavior, in a way that's a threat. And to be certain, the all-knowing characteristic of God is significant for choosing right behavior. But to rightly appreciate the omniscience of God, we need to embrace something about this that is slightly unconventional, and that is it's both alarming and comforting. Franz Delitzsch, who wrote a huge commentary on the Old Testament and the Hebrew specifically, says this about this. He says, "The universal inspection, the omniscience of God, has an alarming but also a comforting side." So when you realize that there's nothing that you can think or do that God doesn't know, there is something that's alarming, but there's also something that's comforting. And it's alarming in this sense. It's alarming because when we're deceptive, we realize that our deception is fully seen by God. It's alarming because when we realize that even our thoughts and motives are fully seen by God, we realize that there's nothing that we think or feel or experience that God doesn't see. And when we realize that God not only sees our actions, but will act to address anything in our lives that's off-putting to Him, that is alarming. But I want us to think about why this is comforting as well. And it's comforting because when we're faithful, we realize that God sees and rewards faithfulness. This is taught in Galatians 6, verses 6 through 10, which is in the New Testament, this idea of sowing and reaping. But what this is great is that it talks about reaping a harvest, and that God actually sees the places where you're faithful that nobody else sees, that seem unappreciated. And when we realize that every injustice is fully known by God, it means that we can rest and wait, because God is not unaware of the situations. And it means that God sees our challenging situations in our lives and will act on our behalf. And so the real joy here, or the thing that's maybe unconventional, is to say I can experience comfort by living with the knowledge that I actually have nothing to hide. And although it in one ways can be fearful, once we turn toward Jesus, what we realize is that although in one sense we always have something to hide, because of Jesus we have nothing to hide. God's universal inspection is actually an assurance of His strong support. That's 2 Chronicles 16:9. It points to that. And so what I want to do is live my life knowing that everything I think or do is in full view of a holy, loving, and powerful God, and accept that as something that is a comfort in my life rather than simply being an alarming thought.
Thanks for joining us here today. There's a lot of great content to explore on Orchard Hill Plus and on the Orchard Hill main feed from the weekend. Have a great day.